And at this stage is where once that in order to become, for example, a means of finance or to become commissioner taxation, you did not first go do business, succeed very well, and then go to be a civil servant. We know that you are a fantastic civil servant. It is my pleasure, therefore, to invite everybody, in spite of the fact that we started with a glitch, now we are here to listen. But two, and most importantly, we Private Sector Foundation think this is your voice. I implore you to stay tuned so that we can carry on this conversation.
That we keep getting. But before we even move on to getting to speak to the acting executive director of the Private Sector Foundation of Uganda, let's also get to speak to one also joining us live. Because of COVID-19 now, we cannot have large numbers in one particular area, but COVID-19 also came with the realization that what we thought and that to us. Patience, over to you.
For organizing this. I bring you greetings from the Mastercard Foundation, and we are so excited by this opportunity and really humbled of this pandemic since the first case was confirmed in Uganda. So a number of efforts have been done by the government, and all these are appreciated. But allow me in a special way to thank our partner, the Private Sector Foundation Uganda, and all the other partners present, all the other of our interconnectedness and the responsibility we bear for one another. With the outbreak of this pandemic, the Mastercard Foundation stepped up to stand with governments, partners, private sector to address this global challenge. Private Sector Foundation Uganda and several other partners are involved in implementation of this program. This program is a deliberate effort to provide the following. One, support emergency public health response through Private Sector Foundation has been able to do and do successfully. Support access to affordable and flexible financing mechanisms for micro, small, and medium education institutions, including technical, vocational training institutions, traditional technologies across Africa and particularly in Uganda. Also, the focus of this program is to expand public awareness of COVID-19 safety measures through our partners like Psfu and directly through a Pan-African public awareness campaign, $1.3 billion over the next 3 years, in partnership with the African Center for Disease Control and Prevention, that is the Africa CDC. And the aim of this program is to save lives and livelihoods of millions of people across Africa and hasten the economic recovery of the continent. The Saving Lives and Livelihoods initiative will acquire vaccines for at least 50 million people, support the delivery of, through focusing on development of human capital development, and Uganda is to benefit from this. These efforts tie in well in achieving our strategy, our 10-year strategy, the Young Africa Works, whose goal is to ensure that at least 3 million young people, particularly young women, access dignified and fulfilling work in Uganda. And this can only be done if they are healthy and able to deliver in their work. So the foundation has and continues to establish strategic partnerships to achieve this strategy and create impact at scale. Psfu is one of the partners. Psfu has been doing this. The key approach that the foundation has taken is using the lead farm approach, an intervention that aims to enhance linkages within the productive sectors by ensuring market-focused production that is based on the requirements of the leaders and below, but most importantly, young women. We are happy to note that despite the effects of COVID-19 pandemic, the lead farms have so far generated up to over 117,000 work opportunities for young people, and this is through only 16 lead farms and as well as construction. Through the partnership with Psfu, we anticipate to create up to 300 work opportunities and work with 80 lead farms. And in doing this, we'll be able to support young women, become resilient, become economically active, and contribute to the economy of the sense of what should be done in turning around the adverse effects of this global pandemic on our economy and on the future of this country's young people. We're deeply grateful to Psfu and all the other partners and the organizers of this meeting for the passion and commitment that has been shown to the plight of the young people, and we look forward to the outcomes of this meeting and for continued partnership in this country. Thank you very much. I wish you fruitful deliberations.
I totally agree with you with regard to the positivity and openness that should come through with the discussion and making sure that we can be able to find solutions to some of the challenges we are currently facing. And without any further ado, we know well, as the Minister of Finance Planning and Economic Development also did mention, and this was also earlier on mentioned by the Director Policy and Business Development, that is Mr. Stephen Asime, while he was setting the ball rolling for us, that yes, the budget has been read. We are about a number of proposals given to government. Some of these are taken, some are not taken, but like our Honorable Victoria Sechitoloko said, we cannot give up because this is a government that we continuously have to engage with. But looking at some of the proposals, when they say tax, that is when we start asking, tax on what? What is it going to do? At the end of the day, do I have value for my money? But process that one can be able to engage in. And there is at least a point where you can be able to take advantage. Over to you, Mr. Francis Kisirinya, who is currently the acting executive director of the Private Sector Foundation of Uganda.
Thank you very much, Mildred. Thank you very much, NBS, the Honorable Minister of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, the Chairman of PSFU Board, Honorable Eric Aranga, the Vice Chairperson, Honorable Dr. Victoria Sechitoloko, board members, members of the Advisory Council, the country head, MasterCard Foundation, represented by Ms. Biaruhanga, our dear members of the Private Sector Foundation, participants wherever you are, good morning. We really are sorry for the hitch that befell us this morning, but as Private Sector Foundation, what we've learned with the COVID, we always are ready. So I would like to urge you also to be ready. Things can shift somehow, but we can proceed without having many problems. Dear members and Honourable Minister, the report I'm going to present to you today is the peak of the PSFU's cycle in the national budget making process. This process begins with the extensive consultations among our sector members, who are 12 sectors, comprising very many businesses, hundreds of thousands of these in the country. We meet them, we engage them, they give us proposals, we research on them, we synthesize, we harmonize, we compile, and prepare a memorandum that we present to government. Government, through the Minister of Finance, usually meets us, and we have a discussion and agree on a number of issues. We too meet the Parliament to discuss the budget and our proposals. I would like to thank very much members. Over the last year, you've really been very active and engaged so much with us in putting together various proposals. I would like to thank very much again our board chair and the vice chairperson and all the board members, and the chairperson of our policy committee, Mr. Rajesh Chaprot, for the effort you put in compiling and articulating our issues to government. Now, before I get into letting you know what the opportunities are, we as PSFU, we are an accountable institution. It is important for us to tell you exactly what you gave us, we presented to government. What have we come back with? What options do we have to next engage? So this is exactly what I want to do, to tell you what we got and what else we could actually do. So this one is an extreme summary of the many pages of proposals that we made and the responses that government made. We shall share these. You'll find them on our website, but for today, I'm going to pick out only a few areas for purposes of this workshop. Now, the areas that I'll be talking about, I'll be mentioning them. I'll be giving the reasons why we took them up, how the government has actually responded to them from the budget perspective. And I'm going to focus on four major areas. The first one is on the taxation. We proposed generally that Uganda should adopt a progressive tax policy with the aim of, one, accelerating innovation to add value on agricultural commodities. We have maize, we have cassava, we have fruits, and so many agricultural commodities that are wasting away, or if they are processed, we get very little value out of it. The second aim was for us, for the tax policy to increase incomes of farmers who are actually growing these commodities. The third one is to accelerate the import replacement, i.e. local content, in line with the NDP 3 and the stimulus package that government announced some years ago. We thought this was very important, most especially during this time of COVID, because if we don't do it, we will continue having many of our people not having an income, and then that will also impact our businesses as private sector. So we specifically proposed the following. One, and these proposals came from you. It is not that we created them at the Secretariat. There were many. This is not the order in which they came or we presented, but for purposes of today's presentation, we, for instance, requested that government should introduce a tax category for non-alcoholic beverages, specifically called the ciders, and that they should charge a tax of 0% in the first year. The reason is to try to provide market to the many fruits that are rotting away in our country. Honorable Minister, I'm happy to report that this was accommodated in your budget, and we are pleased, and the respective manufacturers are moving forward to install the facilities that are required to process these products and put them on the market. The second one, again in this area, we requested that government reduces excise duty on beer whose local raw material use is at least 75% without water. These beers were being charged at 30% or Uganda shillings 650 per litre, whichever is higher. We requested that this be changed as follows, that it could be 30% or Uganda shillings 550 per litre. We are only looking for a reduction by 100 shillings only in terms of tax. Now, the implication of this, the benefits that the government was going to get out of this were as follows. One, that the potential of these local beers is that it can support about 180,000 farmers with decent jobs. And these jobs can create for them about 123 billion per year. That is massive. The second one is that the tax that government could collect from this area is about 20 billion shillings, both in excise duty and VAT. Unfortunately, the government didn't listen to us and did not actually offer, did not accommodate this, this proposal. But let me say one or two things about this. Our country survives on agriculture, and most of our people live in agriculture. We are continuing to improve in methods of producing of our crops. And every so often, you see bumper harvests and prices collapsing, and then farmers suffering. Now, the reason why we should support organized structures like this one for which we are proposing is that the farmers would be organized and they would be producing on focusing on a market that is already there. So they are not going to be suffering with the product after harvesting and they say, oh, now there is no market or the price has collapsed. That is why we are focusing on it and want to, it is mainly to support the farmers. The second thing, our economy is extremely informal. Now, even finding people who have ever signed a contract, who have ever known how to respect contractual terms or work with others is not very possible. But when you have these structures, it is possible that the people that are recruited are going to sign contracts, are going to learn how to respect the contracts, are going to be included in the formal economy. And when you move forward, when you want to organize your economy better, you have a group that is already experienced. Therefore, it is much, much, much easier to develop the rural communities utilizing this sort of organized systems. So we hope that we'll have a chance this year, Honorable Minister, to discuss with you and your team again about how to reintroduce this particular proposal and see that it is accommodated. The third area was the area of, we requested that government considers reduction of the DTS. This is the digital tax stamp charges. We thought that even if government insisted that we have it, which we are not against, at least the charges should be very comparable to what happens in the region. Our prices here, our charges are much higher than what is actually charged in the region. And also, we note that the suppliers or the providers of these services are foreign companies. It's not that we're against foreign companies, but we think our people here can do this same work. And therefore, if this contract is maintained as it is, the country will continue spending and externalizing money outside, and to talk about it during the year, is taxes. Because if you do, you generally increase the cost of doing business, but also reduce the purchasing power, the money that consumers have to spend on necessary goods and services. So we had recommended that we should not increase taxes, we should retain them where they are, and specifically we had requested that the issue of the OTT tax be dropped. Unfortunately, the OTT, fortunately, was dropped, but unfortunately, an excise tax of 12% was introduced. So clearly, this increases the cost of doing business and is not desirable in this COVID era, where use of digital systems is the way we are handling business. You can see this conference, we usually have it in hotels before, but now it is online and on air. So things have changed. So we really needed to look at this area and not increase taxes in it. Now, the second area we focused on and presented to government was that COVID has really been a challenge. If you're not treating patients, your shop is closed, all your job has gone, or your salary has been reduced. So you have no means at all, or they are actually a lot shrinked. So we're thinking that these reduced means are going to undermine our capacity in the productive industries to produce things that will be bought by the population, because the population will have reduced purchasing power. So we thought that, importantly, government should focus on ensuring that they maintain the purchasing power in the population. And I'm happy to report we specifically requested around 4 things, and the government and the minister has actually responded to some of them. The first one, we requested that domestic arrears be paid. And I'm happy to mention that this was accommodated in the budget, but the minister has also informed us in his speech that they have released all the money for domestic arrears that were budgeted this year. So we're looking forward to getting the checks, all the money into our bank accounts. The second thing, we requested that the local content law should be completed. It was enacted by Parliament, but it is not yet been effected because of disagreements over a few things. Now, the minister has, in his speech, he prioritized the idea of working on the local content law. So we are hoping that during the year, the local content law will be finalized, but we hope that the contentious issues on classification and the criteria for what a local company is will remain as was proposed and not changed. So meaning that if we use the resources that we have internally to buy our goods and services, money will be rotating among us, and by doing so, we shall maintain the purchasing power. We also suggested that we should enhance the implementation of Buy Uganda, Build Ugandan, because as we speak today, the performance is way below 40%, which is the desired rate at which local goods should be actually purchased by government departments. Kenya is already at 40%. We are nowhere near there. So we should make all the effort to enhance local content. The next area which we are happy with is that the government promised this time that they will insure their assets. So this helps in increasing the business that the insurance sector is working with, and therefore we expect that that will also increase the capacity of the people in the sector to have more money that they can actually spend. The third area is about the cost of finance. I'm so happy that the minister has, when we recommended and requested that UDB be capitalized up to 1 billion shillings, this is almost like 3.5 trillion. A lot of effort is going into this to recapitalize UDB. First of all, they put in about 440 billion around last year. This time they are putting 103 billion. So we think this is a very good move from the minister. But we think that the requirement for capital in Uganda is so great. Therefore, even if we capitalize UDB to $1 million, we still need to raise and mobilize money from the general public to create our own local savings. And the two tools that we can use are the retirement savings. One, savings for people who are employed in the private sector, but also for people who are employed in the public service. In the private sector, the current law, or the amendment that has been passed by Parliament, opened the people who can actually access or can participate to beyond people, more than 5 people in a company. This is a very good thing. But what has happened is that it has also not been assented to because of challenges. We also know that the government pension scheme has not been operationalized, and what we heard the other day is that it is being postponed. We think this should be given priority so that we start mobilizing money now. If we mobilize money and we have it in the economy, we will not suffer with the increased cost of borrowing because there has been some foreign matter that has come in the cost of the money that we borrow to finance our businesses. So we hope that this could be done during the financial year, but unfortunately the minister did not mention so much about this. We hope we'll have a chance to talk to him. The last thing that we specifically requested members was to ask the government to improve the way it implements agreed policies. This is a big, big challenge. Things are agreed, but they are not implemented, or they are very, 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 very slow. There are so many examples I can't give you. You know them. But we recommended that, first of all, let the private sector be involved in implementation of policies and programs, and also in their monitoring. Where Private Sector Foundation has implemented some government programs, we've seen some changes. We think we can do more. The second thing, we want to be part of the monitoring of the government programs so that we are able to encourage faster implementation and be able to get reach people quickly. Now, there is a matter that has come that government considered, which is the matter of rationalizing government agencies so that they can save money, which is a very welcome move. But what we request that let us do a survey first, a research, and find out how this consolidation should happen, because if it just happens, it might affect service delivery to the private sector. Lastly, on implementation, we requested the government to start instituting what we call a rewards and sanction system, so that those who are doing their jobs are rewarded, and those who are not doing their jobs are sanctioned. We didn't hear very much mention about this, but we would encourage the government to look at this as we move forward. So members, that is a brief summary of the 4 areas that we focused on during the last year. Of course, there are so many areas. If you've not had your own proposal, don't mind, we have all of those. So in total, if we looked at all the proposals and compared with what government has actually taken in, this year government took in about 72% of our proposals.
Wow.
It looks good, but unfortunately, it is the lowest in the last 10 years. So I want to thank you very much, Honorable Minister. We know that it would have been higher, but you are probably distracted by the political season. But we know very well that every time we've had, within the 4 years, we've had 4 instances when the accommodation was lower, and the lowest that time was 73. But every time we had the drops, the subsequent year, you took in much more. So we expect that in the year 2022, 2023, Honorable Minister, you are going to accommodate much more of our proposals. And members, I'm requesting you, let us start now. Let us engage, let us put together the issues, let us research them, let us compile the memorandum and start, start engaging on them. They are likely to take in more next year than they took in this year. Before I leave this, I would like to request the Honorable Minister that these metrics, which we use to capture how private government is responding to our proposals, is one of those indicators, in our view, of how friendly government is to the private sector. We are requesting that this matrix is captured under the key performance indicators in our NDP3 monitoring and results framework. When this is done, it will encourage the government to engage with us more. It will encourage us also to engage with the government more so that we together are able to improve our economy beyond what it is now. Now, members, I shouldn't end this without talking about what opportunities there are for you. I would like to thank the minister. He talked very much about what they have provided, but I want to sing out a few things so that we start preparing ourselves to take advantage. One of them is that there is a lot of money that is being pushed to the parish development model. Obviously, these are going to require goods and services, and it is us, the private sector, who provide this. So get ready in your communities to provide those services and goods and take advantage of that money. The second thing is extension of the restructuring program for loans because of COVID. We know that the program will now end in September. Obviously, this was before we knew the implications of the second lockdown. We tend to think that this should be reconsidered and probably extended to beyond December. But even before that happens, private sector, I know the minister has said he has already had 7 trillion worth of loans restructured. If you have not, please go back to your bank and ensure that your loan is restructured so that you are able to get some relief and continue doing business. We are happy with the UDB, the capitalization. Please, business community, let's go and get and apply for that money and utilize it. For the young people, there are 2 things here, and we are happy to support you as you actually are pursuing this. One, there are resources that have been provided. It's called seed capital, amounting to about 200 billion under the Myoga scheme, which is for youth entrepreneurship. So young people, do you hear me? This is an opportunity for you to access that money, not to eat, not to spend on anything, but to start your work, your job, and invest, and then grow from there. The second thing for young people, the minister has announced that they are going to open regional science and technology parks and incubation centers. You are people of ideas. You have so many ideas as young people. Please go to those centers and ensure that your ideas are incubated. Lastly, the government has committed and has signed on the oil exploration agreements. This is the time to take advantage, either as direct service providers and goods producers to the goods suppliers to the oil industry, but also in supplying other ancillary goods and services. Those people who are working in the oil sector will need food. So farmers, this is a big opportunity. The insurers, this is a big opportunity. Bankers, manufacturers, let's take advantage of this investment that has happened in our country. I would like to conclude, ladies and gentlemen, by telling you that we think will make our business community better. What we are realizing from COVID is that government is battered. The resources are very limited and they have to keep on borrowing. The private sector is suffering too. So for us to be able to make meaning and dig ourselves out of this challenge, we need to work together, more collaboratively with the government. I would like to ask government to reach us out, and we shall also reach out to you. Let's trust each other, discuss issues in issues using facts, and then work out strategies for implementation so that these strategies can get our economy back. We are ready and willing, and we'll always, just like our slogan is, we'll always stand with you, our members, because you...
Mr. Francis, government, and 72%, although the law, but key to me as soon as yesterday is the rewards, employee pensionable at the end of the day as well. Like I said earlier on, made us really embrace it, the better. To be speaking to us, and of course, we all proposals and giving advice to government to us.
His input and the board, and to listen into what is going on, but just had other thoughts. Slides that we prepared for presentation to be able to recover the time we had. And because now that it is the avenue of Gardens of Guru, and then we have our slides running so that we can go through quickly, but as they come on, it's not just an annual event. We should not be looking at budgets of 2021, 2022, because as we have noticed, part of the borrowing that is eating into our budget is the number of years. And so we should not just be looking at one point in time, but the implications in the future, and we'll be looking at some of these in this, and quite a number of things, and we need to be speaking to a budget, knowing that both directly and indirectly should be resolving issues for the individual business community. It's quite often easy for an individual person in a business is part of other businesses. The high cost of medical care, everybody has been complaining about the hospitals, until the hospital only the consultant. Some of these people come from different areas. Meaning to improve the business environment will require us to address, let's move on to the next slide, where we want to see the budget. This is the budget as read. If you look at what I have highlighted in blue, this is the revenue side of the budget. And we just put these 2 years as was presented in the private sector, because deal these taxes majority sector, but also it shows to a problem. The next line of blue, but that is not entirely true. And now they are looking at the entire globe. So the challenge really is what is going to be used to capture by the end of the day. So we need a good, again, these are quite not very flexible. COVID effects on the private sector. You want on the private sector, but this government deal with half of that. There is hardly any, even as he runs his budget entry, it swells our budget to 40, the expenditure side. The next we are looking at of the minister rising out of our previous decisions, because there are other issues that the minister may have. No longer a budget problem. It's an analysis unit. It was easier to be seen. Fringes that the ministry has or the budget has, and I don't want to look at them as budget problems, but rather process and policy issues that need to be addressed. Francis has raised an important issue of the ministries that need to be revisited to make the government more agile, more responsive to the needs of the day, and rather than of agencies, for example, in the road sector. You're not only dealing with UNRWA, road fund, you're actually dealing with the segmented nature of dealing with the road network. Resources will actually would be in need of. Let's move on to the next slide. Had a conversation on that while the budgets have increased, doubled literally over the last 6 years, they have not translated into a growth rate that is positive. So the bigger the budget, the less the growth rate. The growth rate seems to be trending down, and yet we would expect the budget to be a driver of growth. Taxes come out of growth, private sector opportunities are created out of growth. Now we have a disconnect here that the budget is not speaking to those realities of creating the opportunities that we would really want to have. And that is, for me, a policy issue and not necessarily a budget issue. Until you fix the source of that, you are going to continue having these particular challenges. Some of them I've already hinted on. You'll have your budget to grow because of domestic refinancing, which is not going to speak to that particular year, but you are here dealing with the decisions of the past, the growing component of interest. So you practically have about 34% of the budget dealing with debt matters which are historical, and unless the investments we made have actually given us an opportunity, you still have a problem of COVID. I don't want us to just look at practice. COVID affects those with underlying conditions. So when COVID came, it found the Ugandan economy with a lot of underlying conditions. So even as we come up with responses to COVID, we should not just be looking at 2021, 22, or 22, 23, but how do we realign this economy and give it sustainability, resilience, and inclusiveness over the next 5 to 10 years? Next slide, please. The budget to grow, possibly several folds in the last 5 years, and it may not come down or might actually continue to grow. So as I'm saying, COVID aside, there are historical weaknesses that need to be addressed. The public sector investments we have done have lacked out what economists and other development practitioners will call a theory of change. You are doing this, how is it supposed to translate into the result you need? And this is very clear in the energy sector, that despite over $5 billion we have put in the energy sector over the last 20 years, we are still right where we were, or possibly close to where we were 20 years ago, complaining about high energy costs, including government coming to subsidize the energy. So what exactly went wrong? These are not budgetary matters. They're actually policy and strategy issues that need to be addressed if we are to provide the environment the private sector so badly needs in order to drive this economy. And there is no alternative to driving the economy besides the private sector. Next slide. This is a picture I possibly took in Kampala 3 years ago, or maybe 4. This was before COVID. But as you can clearly see, the picture shows you on the right, you have two important banks, Barclays and Baroda. Both of them I'm closely associated with those banks. On the left side is possibly what those banks had financed. And this was before COVID, so you cannot say the restructuring of the loans is actually a result of COVID. It won't take away the problem. It will ease the pain. It's like a Panadol. It's like a painkiller, but it is not going to take away a problem that we have always had existing. Many buildings in Kampala have been having a to let sign, and it's quite continuous. Now they would even have had more, but you have even clients leaving because businesses are closing. So already we have had very low yielding assets, huge assets. This is real estate. And I will show before my presentation, the real estate has been a key driver of bank loans, but it's a slow yielding and a low yielding. How do we increase productivity of this economy? You're not going to tell people you invest your money here. You can only send it through a policy signal. And that's my conversation, that it's a policy issue and not necessarily a budget issue. And as long as there are those to let signs, it doesn't matter how URA is efficient, there is not going to be any rental income or rental tax, since the two are related. Next slide. And the borders also, you can see they are there waiting for who to take, and everybody seems to have decided to walk. It goes back to what is happening in the households. If you look at the households downtown, the trade is low, but the households, if you look at the bulk of their consumption, is actually going into items of food, items of housing, electricity, education, and transport. Almost 70% of the household is going into that area. Now, this does not possibly create the aggregate demand for the bulk of the private sector, but if these households could increase their incomes, and this is why we're trying to strengthen grassroots-based institutions. Government effectiveness must be felt at the grassroots, and this is the idea of the parish development model, literally deepening decentralization. Somebody could have used parish development model and it looked to some people as a new thing, but we are really saying let's deepen decentralization let's cause local economic development, let's increase household incomes. With this inclusiveness, all of us will benefit. Because I think now we are we are intertwined. We are in an ecosystem. It's not those who are poor are also going to face a problem with these other creditors. And where do we fix the household challenge and increase their incomes so that the percentages we see here will be smaller, less money spent on food, less money spent on housing, and the rest of the money rolled out into the other parts of the economy that should be active. This is the private sector message that you want to pick from the budget. How is the budget speaking? Not just to particular entities, but also how is it speaking to the real households that provide the market for these private sector investors. Let's move on. And I think the conversation on fruit manufacturing, next slide, please. The conversation on fruit manufacturing should not be necessarily looking at the big items. We need to look at the cottage industry. I always get amazed every time I'm going through Wandegea and I see the Laos fruits or juice and see where they began. There's a lot of juice being consumed in Kampala. How do we support, and in these other urban areas, how do we support cottage level industries that are doing fruit processing? So want to look at the paragraph 18 for me was quite instructive in the budget. Inadequate systems or program-based budgeting has been the design for the NDP3. Unfortunately, even the current budget, as we look at it, has been approved through sectors. When are we going to look at the economy as an ecosystem? That paragraph, I picked out this point for obvious reasons. One is that the judiciary has been given an extra resource from 199 billion to 376, almost double. A portion of that is provided for recruitment of judicial officers, 18 billion for electronic court and case prosecution management information systems. Very good investment. But if you only look at the judiciary and you forget who the judiciary works with, you expect suboptimal results. What is happening to the budget of the police department on investigations, and what is happening to the budget of the Directorate of Public Prosecutions? If those have not been funded, and I'm getting disturbing news that the budget for the DPP has actually been slashed. Now, that investment up there of 376 billion would not give you the results. If the DPP's office is not functioning, if the police department on investigation is not functioning, you will only have private legal cases possibly being managed, but we know cases are intertwined in many ways. There is another conversation, subsidizing power and giving tax waivers to those in industrial parks. This is a message that was given by government that those in industrial parks, if you're investing over 180 million, you are going to be given tax waivers, you are going to be having free land of government. Now, who is going to pay for these costs of subsidies? You might be rewarding Francis's member X at the expense of Francis's member Y. And Francis here is a representation of the private sector. So we need to be mindful of what are the implications of some of the decisions that we are making in the budget, because they might actually be hurting our private sector. Let's move on to the next slide. The rest are graphicals, so they will be easier to go through. This is the growth of government borrowing. The line shows the total. The blue is actually the stock of government treasury bills that the Bank of Uganda is trying to issue to manage the effect of excessive spending. And we have a policy dilemma here. While the central bank is trying to apply an accommodative monetary policy by lowering the central bank rate, trying to pull down interest rates, signal an environment of accessible and affordable credit, the government borrowing is actually putting an upward pressure on the active interest rates. The central bank rate is a signal. The real active interest rate is going to be what is the government saying if they want the money. And you can see the stock of government treasury bonds. That would go with the pressure on the interest rate to convince private entities and foreign entities to come and drive us up those brown bars that you see. So those kinds of things are signals the budget would not say, but they are the louder signals in the very market where the private sector investors are active. Next slide, please. In that particular slide, I really raise an interesting thing. what I think is an interesting thing. As I've mentioned, when you do domestic borrowing, you are going to attract foreign investors. Foreign investors bring here dollars. Now, when they bring dollars, government, of course, will convert them into shillings because that's what it needed to do its spending. But that conversion is going to pile up a huge stock of dollars, which will make the shilling appreciate. And a strong shilling is certainly not good for exports. So even as we're talking of import replacement, even as we're talking of export promotion, that mere decision of excessive domestic borrowing, which is attracting foreign investors, has strengthened the shilling so much that private investors would rather do trade because it is cheaper to import than to produce in Uganda. It's an unintended consequence, but it is the reality of the budget as we have run it. I just take an example that if you look at the incentive we are giving in bullet 1, 180 million local investors for import substitution as a response to COVID. You will also have a tax holiday and free land. Now you get to bullet number 2, because of the appreciation of the shilling, the local investor who was earning $1 million in June 2020, and as you can see there at that point, the shilling was 3,771. 1 year later, because the shilling has moved down to 3,570, that exporter, that local investor is losing 198 million. Not because of any decision, not that his market has disappeared, not that COVID has come in, but just because the shilling has become stronger. And as the shilling gets stronger, the message is clear to the importers: go and import. So rather than setting up a factory here for job creation, and that defeats the theme of the budget, industrialization for inclusive growth, for job growth. The budget is signaling and saying, please don't invest in industries, invest in foreign trade. Next slide, please. And the next slide is giving us really the reality of that. The growing level of imports, which are reflecting the hardships to domestic producers, and the decline in our competitiveness as a country. Much as our exports have grown, the imports seem to be growing faster. But what are we importing? Let's move to that next slide, because you want to look at them and say, what can we import substitute? So I think it's a policy issue. I think we need to get back and see what can we import replace? What are we going to continue importing? In which case we can only counter that by increasing our own domestic production. This country is still importing electricity, much as we're even paying for dimmed power. I want to understand the dynamics there. We are still importing animal and animal products. We are still importing wood and products, textiles, prepared foodstuffs. I mean, a lot of things are still being imported. The bottom line there, petroleum, those ones we are going to continue importing. Machinery, equipment, vehicles, those ones we are going to continue importing them for at least the next 10, 15, or could even be 20 years. This is not the investments in Kira 4, notwithstanding. I don't see very many Ugandans, ministers, MDs, EDs, and rich people in town driving vehicles locally made in Uganda. We possibly need also to focus on borders. They are here. They might help us spare parts of those entities. So that's basically what we are importing, that some items we still need to import them, but some items, if the exchange rate was well balanced, and it's a trade-off. You don't want it to be too weak, you don't want it to be too strong. Where should it be? You want to avoid the policy signal that moves your investors into trade rather than into export, and trade in imported goods. Next slide, please. I was looking at credit. So who is borrowing from the banking sector? Even as we restructure the loans, even as we lower the credit, who is borrowing? Who are you supporting? You see agriculture, the blue line is on the left, followed by manufacturing at the lowest. Yet these are supposed to be the real drivers of jobs. These are supposed to be the real drivers of domestic growth. Now, that is followed by trade, the yellow line, but surprisingly also followed by the highest group of borrowers, the mortgage, construction, and real estate industry, greatly affected by COVID in all areas. So there is a lot of fragility that is going on to the banks, that even as the banks are restructuring, they are going to meet a hardship, and we shouldn't only be looking at 1 year or 6 months. The COVID effects are going to be with us for the next 5 years, even when COVID goes away in the second year, from now after we've done every vaccination. Now, these signals should be telling us what message is government giving to the private sector? Is the credit we are struggling with going to the right areas that will drive the economy? Because it is one thing to say credit to the private sector increased. It is another thing to see who actually did the borrowing. And this is very critical for the minister as we capitalize UDB. The monies are still little, but for me, who is borrowing is a fundamental issue. I think I should be getting close to my presentation. Let's look for the next slide, please. So my way forward, one is we must restructure the policies and the institutions across the entire government and not just the agencies. The signal of the government budget deficit driving the borrowing, but also skewing money into the non-tradables. The things we have seen there is not a nice thing. Real estate is not tradable. You cannot export real estate to Kenyans, but you can export agricultural products and manufactured products. As we have seen in the previous slide, these are not receiving adequate borrowing. Not that the banks don't want to lend to them, but the people going to the banks want to invest in real estate, want to invest in trade, in imported goods. Majority of this is not domestic trade. We need to understand the dynamics of the private sector operations and invest using what we call an ecosystem approach. The money is not just going to the hospitals. The money should be going into that whole chain that feeds into functionality of the hospital. The money should not just go into the juice processing, but many other things. So as we think through the policies, it's not just the energy sector or the road sector. It is so many other things that need to come through to support that private sector person, including personnel. How many pulmonologists or virologists do we have in this country? They are not produced by the hospitals, but they are used by the hospitals. If they are very few, the price is going to go up and we cannot legislate over market issues. The point would be, how do you invest in the education system, high level, low level, in order to produce more of these products to reduce the prices. Using the size of the public sector is a conversation we'll continue to have because the fiscal space is tight. The Minister of Finance can only have space if we address those policy and institutional issues. Right now, we are all stuck on a one-way road. You can't reverse. The traffic jam is all over. So even as we appeal to the Minister of Finance, he too has constraints that require massive reforms. And we are not looking at 1 year. We should be looking at the whole spectrum going forward. Improving the planning should reflect the interlinkages between the processes of change and let the budgets respond to the plans. Presently, the budgets are not speaking to the plans because the budget is seen as a beginning and the end. And yet the budget is a means to the end and not the end in itself. How do we boost household incomes? Through greater effectiveness of government, strengthening of grassroots public sector institutions. There must be a parish chief down there. There must be a Mutongole chief. There must be a Muruka chief. And the struggles we are having to send money to the vulnerable is because we have no data. Why don't we have data? It's not a UBOS problem. It's a local authority problem. Talking about the politics, we also what happened last year when the movement wanted to do their primaries. They didn't have a register of their members. And this is not just to the party. This is across government that we do not have this knowledge of what is it that is happening in a health center 3, in a health center 4. So even as the budget is released for COVID to hire more village health teams, health workers, we don't even know where the gaps are, how big these gaps are. If anybody has that information, let them challenge me on this and we'll take it on like the football. Finally, let's improve governance. Accountability, zero tolerance to corruption distorts the market. These should not be things we say because we think some people have stolen money. It's not just about the money they steal. It is actually the entire distortion of the market system. If somebody steals money, they are going to invest it in low-yielding assets. You've seen the real estate. They're just going to buy land and plant trees and leave them there. Planted trees do not generate jobs once the trees are planted, and they're low-yielding, really. You have to wait for 8 years. What if you are growing onions? You put in 5 million, in 4 months, you have 20 or 30 million. Why don't we move into those areas? Those are going to be policy signals set up by the budget, and as we address the budget issues, the institutional issues, and the policy matters. I want to submit and say this is a good conversation that we must continue, but let's not talk about budgets on an annual basis, but rather on a long term. Thank you very much, everybody.
You're welcome. Thank you very much. We would say a round of applause for all those who are watching online and those who are following us for Dr. Fred Muhumu's very key discussions that he did bring through. On the aspect of accountability, I think that's a song that we've launched several times in the country, and we will continue launching it until it is clearly sold out. But he particularly paid attention to the subsidization cost. Who bears that cost at the end of the day, as we're hearing about tax holidays, as we're hearing about, people being subsidized? Who at the end of the day gets to pay that particular cost? That's a key question that needed to be that still needs to be answered. And at the end of the day as well, when government continues talking about putting money in UDB, recapitalizing UDB, who is borrowing the money from even the other financial institutions, and where are they investing that money? Is it bringing an effect directly and immediately, or we need to have a totally different discussion about that? Thank you very much, Dr. Fred Mohamza. Now, the implications, and when he was talking about UDB recapitalization and then who manages to get this money, he always as well refers to the small and medium enterprises. Do they have what it takes to borrow money from UDB at the end of the day? That's a very good question. And yet these are so many of them in the economy and are employing a number of people and are having a number of challenges. We will be having the discussion on the small and medium enterprises much later on. But for now, we'll be going in for a video clip that is particularly highlighting the implications of COVID-19 on employment and the young people being brought into the context here. Because remember, Uganda's population, looking at the demographics, over 75% are what we would consider very young people. Let's take a look.
I'm called Atwine Sabrina, a female aged 22 years, and the founder and CEO of Nimarunji Initiative, which is a young business startup based in Kabale district. Started in the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic, and we harness the use of data, information, and evidence to eradicate education inequality and increase resilience among the education sector. We do this by collecting data, analyzing it, and providing visualized data to education stakeholders to influence effective decision-making and policies. There are so many challenges that we faced, whereby one, it was the knowledge gap, bearing in mind that we were just young students having an idea and the passion to bring about change. We didn't have skills in project management, publication, data analytics, and it affected our growth for the start. Then we also faced the challenge of lack of resources. We had the ability, we had the ideas, we had the potential, but we didn't have resources to help us implement all the ideas that we actually had. It was also hard for us to get connected to businesses or organizations that are already thriving in business, having in mind that we could get knowledge from them, skills, partnerships, and collaborations. It is very useful and important to startups to get workshops and trainings that can equip them with knowledge to help them manage their businesses, manage their projects, and also have the employability skills for their teammates. Also, it would be very useful and important for young startups to be connected to organizations and companies that are already thriving in business in the same field of work like them. Also availing opportunities to them, like how the Innovation Village has helped us connect us to different opportunities. Young startups can make use of these opportunities. Sometimes they are not even aware that there are opportunities for them. For Nimarunji, this is a topic that is deep and personal, looking at how young people for the past decades have been affected by lack of employability skills, making them unemployed. So what we are doing as Nimarunji is actually to defy the status quo, which requires young people to have skills the moment they are to be hired. For us, we believe that every young person has the potential and ability. All they need is a platform to exploit themselves. So we look only at interest and passion, which has helped us to bring on board very many young people who are curious and interested in bringing change to their communities. At the moment, we are working with 8 young women, and we are introducing them to the tech world, and we are committed to learn together and train ourselves. And at the moment, Nimaronji is still struggling with the knowledge gap, bearing in mind that looking at the kind of work that we do, it really needs expertism, and 80% of the members on the team, we are all students doing different things from what our business does. So there is still need for us to get trainings on data analysis, trainings on publication, trainings on project management, among very many others. Nimaronji still faces a challenge of lack of funds, bearing in mind that as much as we want young people on the team, we still need experts in the data field so that they give trainings to these young people and help us grow. We have so many challenges, especially in the response to the COVID disruption on education, and a survey that we are conducting at the moment. But everything we are hoping to target is at a halt due to lack of resources to run the projects, have our own data collecting tools, among very many others. We are also having a challenge of partnerships, getting in touch with organizations and companies that do the same work as we do, so that we gain knowledge from them, and bodies and institutions that invest money in the education sector. Like I earlier stated, that startups can actually make very good use of partnerships and connections to businesses and organizations that are already in business and that are already thriving in business. So as Nimarunji, we would really be glad and excited to collaborate with organizations that are already in the data analysis field, so that they guide us and help us grow and we learn from them. We would also be glad to be connected to opportunities, grants that can help us gather resources for our startups. Also trainings and workshops for these young people that we actually recruit from different backgrounds. That we would love to have workshops and trainings for them to help them exploit themselves and build up their potential.
Beautiful experience that you take advantage of a bad situation and come out with a positive thing. And well, talking about resources, yes, that remains a cry. Connections remains a cry. But well, we do want to thank organizations like the Innovation Village that have held the hand of such young startups to ensure that they build capacity for them. But we do hope some of those issues will be dealt with. The organizations out there that can be able to help the young startups. Let's always believe in dreams and not wait to collaborate and partner with the people who are already established. Mr. Francis Kisirinya did say, the young people are here, they have ideas, and we just need to work along with them and ensure that these ideas are actually matured. And we will be, in the next few years or months, having testimonies of where they started from and where they are currently. We're now going into our panel discussion, but I want to remind all our viewers on air and online and all our participants that in case you need to be engaging, the hashtag online is PSFU COVID-19 Dialogue. That is the hashtag that we are following up on in case you have any queries, in case you have any discussions or supplements to what we are having. Starting off our panel, we'll be taking it through the tourism sector. Now, we clearly know that currently, even in the 42-day lockdown, the tourism sector is one that was not locked. But in a way, somehow, it was locked. And we know that one of our panel discussants, Sivi, will be explaining to us Whereas the international tourists are actually allowed to come into the country and go to look at the beauty of Uganda, what happens to the local tourist, you and I who want to visit Kidepo, which is not in your home district at the end of the day? That is a discussion that is going to be coming through. And Sivitu Msime is actually an accounting and a finance graduate and chairperson of Uganda Tourism Association, Acacia Safaris Limited, Acacia Industries Limited, Pakiba Lodge, and Mpogo Safaris. She also serves as the chair, serves on the Private Sector Foundation Uganda board as the chair of the tourism sector. And we are delighted to have you, Sivi, right here. It's day 20 of the lockdown, and one would ask, what is the typical look and feel of a tour operator or someone in the tourism industry currently, where we are with the COVID-19 and the lockdown?
Mildred, I think that the tourism industry has taken a beating over the last 18 months. I'll just give you a background. We are responsible for about 668,000 jobs, 7.7% contribution to our GDP. We have been out of action for 18 horrible months. And these are not blame games. We can't blame government for COVID. But we need to understand where we are and where we're going. And we need government to come in and understand the tourism industry in order to help us. Now, in this industry, there are hotel owners, there are tour operators, there's the artifact creative arts industry that a lot of people don't tend to think about when they think tourism. There are tour guides, yeah? We are directly linked to the agricultural industry. We're directly linked to manufacturing. We're directly linked to health because of our contribution to GDP. And you find that the trickle-down effect of the money that comes to the tourism industry goes through an entire value chain throughout our economy. So we need to understand the importance of tourism. Now take a hotel owner in particular. And I'm happy to take you through this given time constraints. They have borrowed money from these financial institutions. Their occupancy rates were about 52%. They dropped drastically to about 5% after lockdown, after the original lockdown, the first one. How does this hotel owner manage to pay back to these financial institutions and also keep their company afloat or their hotel afloat and not have to sack everybody that's working there? Now we're talking about thousands of employees going home, but home to what? Because wake up one morning and just go home, to what? Now for the tour operator, the tourists book up to 1.5 years in advance, and they pay for these tours. And we receive money for them, and we actually pay Uganda Wildlife Authority and all the hotels and all the service providers. Now, lockdown comes in, and the clients are saying, we want our money back. We want refunds for our safaris. We will plan later on where to go and how to go. How are these tour operators supposed to refund their clients this money? And this is why when they say we want a stimulus package, we want government to intervene, the tour industry needed government to intervene 2 years ago. Start up a tourism development levy everybody leaving this country to go on holiday in Dubai and Mombasa because they're better off enjoying their own country anyway, as we believe, and then put this levy into building the tourism industry, into financing it, especially through times like this. So the situation today is dire. We've seen, and we are grateful. You have no idea how we're grateful to His Excellency the President to allow the foreign national residents to come in and tour, and keep it afloat. Now, I want to tell you that in between the last opening and today, Uganda, as of March 2021, we've received 83,000 guests. So we are an industry based on perception, and there's hope. We believe we're going to get better. We believe that we'll go back to our former glory. Just so you know, Mildred, in the late 60s and early 70s, Uganda was the preferred East African destination. What happened? This is what government needs to ask itself. What happened? How do we get back there? The cost of going on safari in Uganda is higher than the cost of going on safari in Kenya.
Sure.
Or in Rwanda. So there's a lot that government can do to make, and there's money in the tourism industry. The reason you don't realize it, and they focus so much on agriculture and manufacturing, we don't know how long we're going to have oil and gas. We don't know how long these manufacturers are going to continue. World's gorillas will always have scenic views of the crater lakes of Bunyaruguru. We will always have something to sell from the natural beauty that Uganda holds. So whereas we suffer, we see hope. We're an industry of hope, and we hope that it will get better.
Two particular ones, just before I could go to Humphrey. Still on tourism. One, the expense itself, the fact that many have complained about it being expensive. For me to get a ticket and move on to Dubai or something like that, being slightly a little cheaper or literally the same as me having to tour my own national parks in the same country. The expense, how does that come about? How are you planning about it as tour operators, especially now that we're promoting domestic tourism? But also, it is a lockdown. We're having international tourists and not the local tourists. How are you handling that, and why would it be that particular way?
I'll start with the expense. I'll tell you what the hotel industry is suffering today. There are 23 different taxes and licenses, and all of them have to be met by one business person or one company. And there are 2 proposed coming on board. Yeah? So the industry is choking on taxes. So government needs to go back and look at this taxation policy and decide what do we do. Secondly, we need to aggressively market our country. We cannot sell what we don't appreciate as a country. So government needs to direct its efforts into selling this country. I'll tell you, under the SEDA project, PSFU, between 2017 and 2019, we saw a growth of 4% in tourism arrivals because of a matching grant facility where they took 50% of the costs of marketing from the tour operator and paid for it. So you brought 50%, SEDA brought 50% under that World Bank project, matching grant facility, and we were able to go leaps and bounds to market this country. Now, why are you not going to travel your country, Mildred? I think we need to put health even before comfort. You traveling your country is a luxury. And I say this as a beneficiary of you coming.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So you traveling your country is a luxury. You're taking your COVID from your home and taking it to Kidepo and taking it to Maction Falls and taking it to Bwindi and even infecting our gorillas. Now the tourism travel, the foreign tourist travels in a bubble. You come with your PCR test and we test you again at the airport. We test the guide who takes you. So you travel on to your destination and go through the country without interfacing on a large scale with Ugandans. And then we also test you on your way out. Now we're following up on our tourists. We know where you are. We keep you in Entebbe until your results come out, one of 5 hotels that we've agreed upon with government. We're working with Ministry of Health. We have been, and they've been very responsive.
Okay.
We're working with Ministry of Internal Affairs, the immigration, and for us, this interaction has taught us that there's very good people in government. There are people who need to be educated on this industry in order to promote it.
Okay.
I will tell you that it takes less than 24 hours for you to get a Ugandan visa online. And I want to credit immigration, the General Gowa and the Kano Kambere on an excellent job, because when we had this meeting with them, we had lots of calls. They changed the way online applications can be done. You can get a visa on arrival today in Uganda. And I was blown away by how helpful government officials can be. Now we sit back and say, oh, government, oh, government. But there are men and women out there who are pulling their weight in order to give 100% to growing this economy.
Okay.
So please stay in your homes. We would like for you to open. We'll tell you that domestic tourism kept us afloat last year. We had never seen Ugandans travel that much. You also need to bear at the back of your mind that Kenya recognizes Uganda as one of its biggest source markets. So if we can go and
And yet
travel
the reverse may not be true for us.
yeah. Now, the cost of going to Dubai is definitely lower than the cost of flying into Kidepo, which means government needs to come in and look at the infrastructure challenges
True.
for the tourism industry. Now, the cost of driving down to Bwindi and tracking a gorilla is definitely higher than the cost of doing it in one of the neighboring countries. Yeah? So we need to go back to the drawing board. The government needs to go back to the drawing board. There's very little input in the tourism industry, and yet there's maximum output. Yeah? So this industry being private sector driven has been left to private sector to push. And we need government to come in and say, this is what we can get out of this industry. We are definitely much better than the speculation of oil and gas. We know what we have.
Yes.
We don't know how long we have oil and gas for. So let's focus on what we have and let's add more products. We've been selling the same products for 20 years in these national parks.
And we'll still sell them.
And we'll still sell them, but we could add to these products.
Okay. All right, thank you very much, Sivi Tumsime. I will definitely still continue to engage you. Sivi is particularly addressing issues of the implication of COVID-19 on the tourism sector. But allow me join Humphrey. Humphrey Nzei is a Ugandan businessman, and he does also sit on the board of the Uganda Manufacturers Association, as well as the Private Sector Foundation Uganda PSFU board, where he serves as the chairman for the manufacturing sector. Now, we know manufacturing is also one of the other sectors that the president continuously has said, even during the lockdown, should remain open. We've had aspects and talk about the BUBU policy and the local content policy as well, which Dr. Fred Muhumuza earlier on while speaking actually did talk about how do we deal with the local content law. But to you, Humphrey, let's start off with the extent to which the budget has addressed the COVID-19 pandemic implications on life, on business, and job creation in the productive sectors. And here we're looking at manufacturing itself, there is agriculture, but there is also mining and ICT.
Thank you very much, Mildred, and thank you to our Honourable Minister of Finance, our Chair, Dr. Eli Karahanga, our Vice Chair, all the members of PSFU, and all our listeners today. Thank you very much for giving us this time. Well, when we look at this budget, we have to look at it against the backdrop of when it was written. This budget was written earlier on this year and delivered in early June. And straight after that, we entered into a lockdown. So at the time of its conception, the economy was on a trajectory of recovery. Since then, many things have happened. Yes, we've gone back into lockdown, and there's a need to readdress this budget. And this is what this dialogue is all about. As we look at this year's budget, which was themed industrialization for inclusive growth, employment, and wealth creation, we as manufacturers first thank government for focusing on industrialization in this year's budget, focusing on value addition and on industry as a whole. Now, when you take a closer look at the budget, there are some key wins for industry in the budget. First off, government pledged to construct industrial parks across the country. Now, these industrial parks will aid business. As Dr. Muhumuza said, people will be given land to set up their industries. So this is exciting for manufacturers and for industry as a whole. Government also pledged to support local manufacturers to increase the capacity to produce medical and pharmaceutical products for the local markets. This is a very important step. As we've seen globally, there's been a shortage of supplies for a lot of medical items, and to aid production of that here in Uganda is a great step. Recapitalization of UDB by 103 million, this is outstanding. Last year, we had access to 555 billion. An additional 103 billion is coming in this year. So this is support to industry that is much needed. And it's something that we really thank government for. Government have also committed to developing 7 skills development institutions. Now, technical institutions, what we've seen is with technical jobs, people get employed faster. With technical skills, people get employed faster. So this is a very important area, and a very important area for job creation. Government also pledged to support the existing sugar factories to produce industrial sugar. This is huge investment for the sugar industries, and industrial sugar is a large area of import substitution that we can attack. They've also pledged to enhance the capacity of UNBS and NDA to perform quality assurance and conformity of standards. This is important for industry because it stops fake goods in the market. We stop competing with fake goods, and that's a very important, that steals so much of our market. Government have also pledged to help enforce laws on counterfeits. This is something that needs to be arrested. You know, our market again is being stolen by counterfeits. They've also pledged to enforce the laws on local content. Local content, like Francis said earlier on, you know, we as private sector, we want to accomplish and achieve about 40% of government procurement from local entities. We have oil coming, and local content is going to play a much, much bigger role in that sector. You know, $20 billion of investment is coming into the country. If we can have local content as part of that, then you will see a lot of that money retained in this country. And then also, we applaud government for the recent announcement of tax holidays for local investors. A lot of times, local investors are overlooked, and we thank His Excellency that this time there is a provision for local investors. So those are the key wins for industry in this year's budget. However, there are also areas where we could have had better interventions by government. Yes, there are areas which we suggested, and we really should have seen better involvement from government. Key amongst those is digital tax stamps. I know Francis mentioned this earlier on. Digital tax stamps is an issue that has been long running with government. We don't, as manufacturers and as industry, we're not against the concept of digital tax stamps. However, the cost of the stamp, we feel, should be borne by government. Manufacturers have engaged His Excellency on this issue, and we're waiting for implementation. But there needs to be deeper dialogue with government on the implementation of digital tax stamps. And in this budget, we see them rolling out to cement and sugar. And we feel that that's something that needs to be addressed before we roll out to these new sectors. The budget, of course, having been drawn up before the second lockdown, it didn't address a lot of issues, and it didn't build in any safeguards for livelihoods. So we need to relook at how we build in safeguards for livelihoods, how we build in safeguards for business continuity. That's something that we need to look at. Power tariffs, on a positive note, power tariffs have been subsidized for large industries. However, we need now these subsidies to trickle down to small and medium enterprises. Low cost of power will increase production, lower the cost of production for our small manufacturers, and that makes us more competitive in the market. Despite central bank lowering their CBR rate to 6.5% recently, the cost of finance still remains prohibitive. In commercial banks, cost of finance, prime rates still hover around 17.5%, 18%, and we find that we're only able to access finance at around 20%. So this is something that needs to be addressed. Government have done the right steps, but we feel there needs to be a dialogue with the banking sector. If they can access finance at 6.5%, they should also pass on a lot of that benefit to consumers. Recently, government also raised an excise duty on the budget for plastics of 2.5%. Now, we don't feel this was well thought out because it has far-reaching effects. When we look at things like packaging for exports, that excise duty increases the cost of our exports. When we look at plastics for sanitary ware, for pipes, sanitary pipes, this doesn't we need to have better thinking around this particular. Internet has to be viewed as a tool to enable business. You know, in these lockdowns, we have an environment where people are working from home, students are online, so you know this is prohibitive. Whereas one could access internet before in the offices are now only 10% occupancy, so people have to have internet at their homes in order for them to work at home. So these are areas that we feel that government should have addressed. So since this new budget, many things have happened, and there's a need to realign expectations and tailor the budget to meet the current needs of the nation, while also holding on to the long-term goals of the nation. Already government is talking of reallocating resources to spur growth, and we thank His Excellency for this move. Now, when we look at what needs to be done to reallocate resources, we need to look at what happened in the last lockdown and its effects on the economy. Last year, the economy grew by 3%, and if you put this against a backdrop of our population growth of 3.2% every year, that growth is not enough to accommodate the increase in population. During the lockdowns, what we also saw in the private sector is that among the micro, small, medium sized enterprises, only 10% of them were able to work during the lockdown. So that's a very small number of quite a significant part of our economy. So we need to address that. In the job market, we have a situation where 6.5% of people were retrenched and have not gotten their jobs back up to now. So we need to address the issue of job creation and job retention, more importantly. On the positive side, like the Honourable Minister of Finance said, government through the banks was able to allow a restructure of $7.3 trillion shillings of loans. And if you look at this amount, 7.3 trillion shillings, this equated to 43% of all commercial loans out there. So that we thank government for that, and that has really helped us to stay in business. UDB also, as I said before, was allocated 555 billion and a further 103 billion. You know, as manufacturers and industry would like to see this amount increased in order to help us. So what we need to do now when we're re-looking at this budget is to start providing solutions for livelihoods to continue and support for businesses to continue. Thank you very much, Mildred.
You're definitely still with us. You talked about local content, and this also was highlighted by Dr. Frederick Muhumuza. There is the Buy Uganda, Build Uganda policy, and he was also talking about government completing the local content policy. Do you think this is the solution to building a resilient economy? And if so, why? And also, how do we need to deal with this entire idea of the local content policy? How better can we do it if we are thinking in the direction of building a resilient economy?
Thank you very much, Mildred. Absolutely, I agree with you. Local content is central to building this economy and creating resilience amongst this economy. During these lockdowns, what we've seen is, imports have been difficult to get into the country. Manufacturing, a lot of supplies have been interrupted. The cost of freight coming into the country has been increased. So when we look at local content, we're trying to say to government that if we start off with government procurement, if at least 40% of government procurement can be sourced locally, yes, there's a lot of benefit for the country. A lot of that income and generated stays within the economy rather than having capital flight. We still have large infrastructure projects that are going on in this country where a lot of the raw materials are brought in completely by the contractors, and we're getting little or no benefit to this economy. Now, when you also look at this big animal called oil is going to bring over $20 billion of investment in the next 5 years into this economy. If we don't look at local content, we will lose out on two things. We'll lose out on retention of some of that 20 billion inside content. We're also developing our people by participating properly in these things. So there is a lot, you know, our target as private sector is to reach 40% local content. And, you know, we have the laws, but we need enforcement. We need government to enforce these laws. You know, as Francis said earlier on, our neighbors, some of our neighbors are accomplishing this. So it is something that is possible. It is something that we can achieve. And it's something that we're pushing government to take seriously and to put at the forefront of what they're doing. Thank you.
A later stage. I will be speaking to Dr. Ian Clark in just a minute, who will be highlighting particularly the aspect of the healthcare system. Now, we know that in the recent weeks, we've been talking about the hiked prices, particularly with regard to the private healthcare facilities. And it is very clear, while the government is paying attention to wealth creation, you can blow up that wealth in just trying to fight for your life. And if there are exorbitant prices and charges with the private healthcare facilities, then how can we be able to balance between, you know, creating wealth and retaining this wealth with a healthy economy and population as well? Now, Dr. Ian Clark is the chairman of the Uganda Healthcare Federation, and he is also the founder of the Chiwoko Hospital, Wero District, and a lifetime board member. Dr. Ian Clark, it's a pleasure having you on the discussion. Now, what options could actually be available to strengthen the medical systems in the country? And this is to provide not only quality, but also affordable healthcare for the citizens. Discussing prices.
Yes, well, perhaps before we get into the discussion of the costs of healthcare, it would be good to just highlight where we stand as far as the COVID epidemic is concerned. Humphrey highlighted that the budget was developed before this second surge of COVID, and the second surge has resulted in a lockdown. And the reason for that is quite simple. If we're going to protect our population, we either have to protect them through vaccination, which will give them immunity to COVID itself, or we have to keep them away from each other so that the virus cannot transmit. And during this second surge, we have found that we're mainly affected by the Delta virus. And the Delta virus is a lot more transmissible, I think about 60% more transmissible. And it's also causes more serious disease. So we find that this second surge that we've experienced in the last month or two has been much more devastating to Uganda's economy and so on because of the lockdown. So when we talk about the cost of medical care, the cost of medical care. So sorry, before I go on to that, I'd like to say that what's imperative is that we get as many people vaccinated as possible, because that's how we can get out of lockdown. And I just returned from Ireland, where in Ireland they have at least 50% of the population vaccinated. They still practice the measures of social distancing and wearing masks, but there you can see that there's hope, that they're moving toward a context where people are not, there's not nearly as much hospitalization. There's not as many people with serious disease. And so you find that there's light at the end of the tunnel. But if you compare that to Uganda, we've only vaccinated 1 or 2% of the population. And there doesn't seem to be a clear plan as to where the next vaccinations are coming, how soon they're coming, what price they are. I'm glad to hear that in the budget they've set aside 560 billion shillings, but if you look at the price of vaccines on the commercial market today, this would not actually go to meet our needs. On the positive side, approximately 70% of our population are actually under 25 years old. And those under 25 are much less affected than those in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. And while we started vaccinating those over 50, We should now really be targeting all of those over 25. And that, someone did the calculations, that would be about 9 million people, which would be 18 million doses of vaccine. So we're never going to really move forward from lockdowns because there can be a third surge and a fourth surge, and it'll kill our economy, obviously, and it will cause a big decrease on the health indicators as well, because poverty causes poor health. So it is imperative that we prioritize in our budget getting vaccines and getting those vaccines out and getting people vaccinated much more quickly than we have been doing, because sometimes even when we have the vaccines, it's a very slow process. And one of the things I also want to say on this subject, because it's relevant, is that there's so much distrust in Uganda at the moment. Distrust of government, distrust of health systems, distrust of between the public and the private sectors and so on. And distrust causes disinformation. And because of a lot of this disinformation, this misinformation, people are afraid to come for vaccinations, despite the fact that we're seeing our friends die from COVID. So we should follow the science. And the science shows us that the AstraZeneca vaccine provides 60% protection against COVID. And that doesn't sound, well, that's not all that good. But it provides over 90% protection against hospitalization from COVID. In other words, over 90% protection from serious disease from COVID. Now, while I don't want to get COVID at all, I certainly don't want to get serious disease, and I don't want it to die off. And I know if I've got my AstraZeneca 2 doses of vaccine, then I am protected. So let's I just want to provide that context. We must get people vaccinated, because when you look at the cost of health services, the government itself has put in quite large supplementary budgets into the public sector to provide PPEs, to provide logistics, to provide allowances, to buy equipment, to set up regional ICUs and so on. The private sector didn't receive any funding whatsoever. And where the high cost of medical services has generally been reflected has been in intensive care unit treatment, when somebody needs critical care. And we find that, in fact, there's more critical care beds, there's more ICU beds in the private sector than the public sector. That's why people have turned to the private sector. And now the cost of these ICU beds has always been high. It's just that COVID has actually pointed out that this cost of treatment can be 5 million a day for someone being in one of these beds. Because it's not just a bed, it's not like putting a patient in a bed, it's the expertise, it's the equipment, it's the nursing care, it's the drugs and all that kind of thing. And it seems that the private facilities are actually better at this complex kind of care than government is. But government and private sector have not really worked together to solve the problem. Government has said, we're getting an extra budget, it's going into allowances, we need this for ourselves, and you private people, you're on your own as far as this is concerned. And then when the private sector have charged, and I really hope that our members of the Uganda Healthcare Federation are charging standard prices, and there's been no increase in saying that, taking advantage of the marketplace. When they're providing this care, then government is saying, but you people, you're charging a lot of money. But they're charging the money that they need to get to cover the investment, the equipment, the high cost of the medical personnel themselves, and so on and so forth. My message would be, and I don't really see it, but my message would be that the public and the private sectors need to work together. Again, if I refer to Ireland, Ireland simply, of course, it's a richer country, but what it simply did with the private hospitals was it just contracted them to give the care so that they worked together. So the private sector got paid and were able to meet their costs for giving a high standard of care. So I think we need to, in terms of budgeting and government budgeting, the first thing I go back to again is, let's not wait around and see if we get some handouts, which we may do through some of these programs from the World Health Organization. But let us move now on vaccinations, because what's going to happen is, I at first thought this epidemic has been with us about 15 months or so, or more, 18 months maybe. I thought that perhaps by this year, in 2021, we would be pulling out of the issues, we'd be getting vaccinated and moving forward. But at the rate we're going, it's going to be up right through 2021 and right into 2022 and maybe the end of 2022. And when other countries are reducing, Britain's about to reduce the wearing of masks and open up and this kind of thing. When other countries have done that, if we don't move now and make this a national priority to get everyone vaccinated, we're still going to be having more surges. We're still going to be wrestling with the, ICU beds. We're, while other things are, while the international communities are opening up. So let's not, this is the thing. I know government moves slowly, and my frustration with government, because I've actually sat on the COVID response committee for raising funds. And people pointed fingers and said, oh, you people spent the money, you ate the money, and so on and so forth. This never happened. But where I was frustrated is that money was raised. It was put in the bank, and it was prioritized for buying vehicles and for putting up a blood bank and that kind of thing, which was all very fine. And that is in process at the minute, of people wait and see. But now the context is we need to buy vaccines. We need to vaccinate our people. But government sometimes doesn't move fast enough to catch up with the current context. So my message is, as far as budgets are concerned, public and private sector need to work together. Government needs to prioritize buying budgets, even if it's buying vaccines, even if it's a supplementary budget. Thanks.
Dr. Ian, we will definitely be getting back to you in just a bit, especially to expound much more on the issue of cost at the end of the day, because that is very, very key. But I will be getting to Mr. Ramadan Gobi right now, and Mr. Ramadan Gobi is an economist and a policy analyst, and he will also be looking at the economics that works. And he also teaches at the same time at the Makerere University Business School, has done quite a lot of research. I particularly paid attention to his import substitution policy research that he did do with FES, and it's a pretty interesting one to deal with. But Mr. Ramadan Gobi, coming to you, and in your opinion as an economist, what reforms are actually needed for us to recover and create a resilient economy? Because one leader said that, we need to play hide and seek with COVID-19. When it surges, we go into a lockdown. And when the numbers come down, we get out. And yet at the end of the day, we know the adverse effects that come with lockdown. And yet, even in as much as we need to pay attention to the economics, life is very important. Over to you, Mr. Gobi.
Team, Eli Karuhanga, Mzee Karuhanga, and your board, Francis and your team, and of course you guys at NBS who always try to connect us through these systems, and we reach you out. I thank all of the...
So we can as well be able to see you. Thank you. Thank you.
I think we need a number of reforms in areas that are not well spoken about, areas which will require some bit of budget neutral interventions. We are very quick at getting to those areas which are going to impact the government balance sheet, but there are also some reforms which are budget neutral in nature. These are reforms that would improve both the flexibility and also efficiency in the economy without affecting much the government balance sheet. I will think right away that we urgently need some structural reforms to alleviate rigidities and also inefficiencies arising from the way the government behaves or functions, particularly in its entities, reducing bureaucracy. In the post-COVID recovery times, we shall not need, any dosage of bureaucracy, regulatory failures, issues to do with the too much public sector footprint in certain particular areas, and also too little footprint in other areas. We need this is an area which hasn't been looked into, how to support businesses to continue or to recover by reducing compliance burden, particularly for SMEs. There is a lot of regulation in certain areas, and they requested the Insurance Regulatory Authority to look into how to adjust a bit on the regulatory framework so that insurance companies don't find it so difficult to comply. The same is needed in URA on how, for example, the businesses are filing their tax returns. I would think that for SMEs, we need to move from monthly to quarterly, for example, filing, such that are facing a very huge challenge with the liquidity. We need also, on the private sector side, there is need to guard or sort of self-regulate unionization, and these are likely to increase during the recovery period. Because, sometimes some business people spend more time in government offices lobbying for support, also self-regulate that. Let us utilize more organizations like PSFU, UMA, Uganda Manufacturing Association, and others to do the advocacy and lobbying instead of individual entrepreneurs running around the government offices, spending more time at State House. We need also to accelerate the capital market development. In Uganda, we are too much looking at how can government support us, to fund us, and government is equally constrained. Government does not have money, especially our government now. It overborrowed in the past because of our ambitious agenda to build the infrastructure, and it thought that oil will be here now and we shall be having money to repay these debts. The oil delayed as we. And because of that, therefore, I think we need to invest more in building our capital. In this, we shall need venture capitalists who accept higher risks, these SMEs and so on. So the capital markets agenda in Uganda, I know my good friend Keith Kariyajira period, we are going to need more of these venturists and the venture capitalists than government in order for us to be able to expand and take our businesses in. And this is a budget neutral area which many countries have tried, governments have tried to support businesses by getting what we call creative self-financing reforms. These are needed to encourage businesses and firms to keep workers on payroll or to hire more. Because now, as you know, and COVID, it goes without saying that most people, younger people, have lost livelihoods. The American lockdown, which now we are effectively in, we are likely to have up to 3 million livelihoods, employing some Ugandans in informal. If there are firms which can also be incentivized to hire more people as we recover later, again, government has to come in and support them. How all that retain workers, and this will, the workers will eventually pay income tax, and even the multiplier effect. Now with the many younger people laid off and they all and businesses borrow, some of these businesses might find it difficult to access this money. And yet, if you give them some retain workers on the payroll or to hire some more workers, that would be a self-financing. And we have talked about this severally. And now it is interactions and reduce the anti-competition kind of behavior, collusion, and in natural monopolies, is a producer, is a wholesaler, these will not survive. Some of them, the waves of linkages. And linkages is what actually drives the economy. So competition law, which has eluded us for so many years, we need really to come and enact it. Finally, military, we need to prepare our, many people are going to run out of work. Digital adaptability, getting some of these younger people, the boxers, they look out to us and they ask, how do I really reposition myself? This is something which we are not having enough conversations about, both government and private sector. It is something which we need to do so that we can prepare the younger people for the post-COVID new everybody is going to live. These are things we are doing here now, having conversations on TV and so on, not trusting other people, having compassion and so on. They will be required. Because as I always say, you know, in the new Uganda, we are likely to have empathy as the new gold standard. And this empathy is not enough, though, if we don't prepare our people to be able to take advantage of the new business opportunities which are likely to emerge, and also reskilling to ensure that they can be able to work in the new environment and the deliberate programs to do some of these things. I will stop here for now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ramadan Govi. And definitely, yes, time is against us. But I'll give you just one more minute. I know that you sit on the board of the Uganda Development Corporation. Which are the sectors that ought to be prioritized in such a time that would create much more better ripple effect and uplift the economy out, in your view as an economist?
You know, we have been growing the economy without creating the jobs for many years because we have been selecting sectors that would grow without necessarily looking at sectors that would also create employment. To me, I think, as we have seen, the hardest hit sectors have been in that order: tourism, trade, both wholesale and retail. Then we have the manufacturing, and then agriculture. We need to look at sectors selected according to their output multipliers. And agro-industry is still ranking highly because of its linkages. The light manufacturing is also ranking very highly because of its ability to absorb semi-skilled labor, which we have in bigger numbers, and unskilled labor in Uganda. And I know some people have had this feeling that, you know, manufacturing can no longer, by looking at the trade-offs. If you can trade off some levels of efficiency for jobs, you can actually create a great number of jobs still in manufacturing. And many countries now in South Asia, manufacturing, but also in hospitality sector. You know, hospitality sector has been the hardest hit. When you are hit so hard, when it comes to recovery, you also tend to have more momentum and the growth, but also the jobs, especially.
Mr. Ramadan Govi, I know CV right here should be very, very excited about that particular submission, but we will be getting back to CV. Esther Nzei, what are you doing as the manufacturing sector before even government comes through to ensure that you keep afloat? Because at the end of the day, you have employees with as some of the issues or areas that government needs to sort out. But what more can government do on top of what you are planning as the manufacturing sector to do to mitigate the risks that have been caused by the COVID-19?
You know, the average household in Uganda is 5 people. So for every job that is lost, it impacts 5 people. We push 5 people into vulnerability. Just as Ramadan said, that's a key area that we need to focus on. So manufacturers and industry, we would like to keep our workforce as they are, but we need support of government. That 30% that we pay on behalf of employees will allow us to retain another 30% of our workforce. So it's incentives like, internet is such a huge facilitator, especially for the small and medium scale industries. We need to relook at that aspect of the budget and make sure that internet is accessible. A lot of MSMEs use that internet to market their business. We're talking of online businesses now that we're in lockdowns. So Dr. Muhumaza earlier on told you that URA, is expected to collect 50%, 57.5% of the total taxes to finance internal raising capital internally. Now that's a very positive thing, and for external sources to only be 28% of our budget support, that's an amazing accomplishment, and that's something that we're all aligned to. But in the short term, URA needs to, they've been having a very aggressive stance towards business in the recent past. We need to tone that down. We need a situation where URA is more empathetic to the situation that people are going through, and look at short-term change, but keeping your long-term objectives still in place. We also need to, due to the decreased demand in business, a lot of industries are facing problems with expiry of goods. Raw materials with depressed demand, raw materials that came in, a lot of them are expiring. So we need help in that, some sort of incentive on that. We talked about enforcement of local content. Local content is such a key area to spur economic revival. If government can get serious about local content, there's so much that we can pump back into the economy. And that's a very, very key area for revival and for growth. I'm very happy with the incentives that they're providing, that His Excellency is providing to local manufacturers, as I said, facilitated with tax holidays. They need facilitation with land, they need facilitation, and that will happen through the industrial parks. So I'm industrial parks. That's a very important issue. That frees up a lot of space in the city when and we have industries in the middle of town. So once you free up that, you free up so much for development. Also, we need to look at the enforcement of illicit manufacturing. We've all looked at Professor Guang's recent invention of Covidex and how quickly people have counterfeited that invention. So we need protection from government for our products. Ugandans are very innovative. We come up with great things. Government needs to protect our investment, protect our products. So enforcement on illicit manufacture is very, very important. Again, I emphasize the issue of access to finance. Yes, government is doing the right thing by lowering the central bank lending rate, but pressure has to be applied to banks so that the cost of financing comes down. Without finance, we really cannot invest in business. Also, when we look at UDB, we really do need government to pump more money into UDB. If government could put another 340 billion to bring that total amount to 1 trillion shillings and open it up to more sectors so that we can have that going through to more sectors, that would have a huge impact on the economy as the assets. We can't, in this environment, we can't all pledge hard assets like properties to access business loans. We have to evolve to a stage where you can access you can put your machinery, put your factory as collateral for your borrowing. Then, of course, one other thing that government needs to incentivize industry through is if government can talk to those businesses and say, look, instead of paying yourselves dividends, if you are able to reinvest about 50% of this back into the economy and show proof of that, then you can have a waiver of corporation tax on the balance. We need to come up with some sort of dynamic like that that can spur investment. We have a lot of industries that are sitting on retained profits that can reinvest those, and that pushes the economy and pushes expansion, creation of jobs. So there's a lot that us as manufacturers can do, but there's a lot we need to hold hands with government, and we need to be incentivized on some of these issues. Thank you very much, Mildred.
You're welcome. Thank you very much, Mr. Humphrey Nzay, speaking on behalf of the manufacturing sector. I'll now go to Dr. Ian as we get to wrap up these. Earlier on, we were talking about cost and cost of health, but also we now know that it's a discussion about behavioral change in managing COVID-19. And how do we help Ugandans manage COVID-19 in the context of their own lives, because it's you or not any other person?
And I think it's a bit sad, the amount of distrust that exists between government and the public, and how that the messages get distorted. I don't think the government has any ill intent toward its own people. And I think that, in fact, we all want to get out of this, epidemic as soon as possible. But we certainly must make sure that we promote the scientific messages, that these forums which are sort of pseudo-scientific, which say, oh, I'm not sure that this vaccine works, or I think government has stolen the money, you know, and all this kind of thing. I think we need to really, all of us together, both public and private, need to say, let's know what the science says, and then let's get those messages out to our people. And then also let's speed up what we're doing, because there is money in the government system, obviously. But sometimes even our very processes in government and the speed at which we move things, such as vaccinations, is very slow. Because what I'm saying is that the cost of the treatment of COVID, when someone's in a serious condition, the cost of the transmission, we break the transmission cycle, but lockdowns have a terrible effect on the economy, terrible effect on people in poverty, bad effect on other health indicators, as I said. So, but while we're on lockdown as well, we also need to think of the future, and we need to do the two things. One is to get the vaccine so that we can prevent ourselves getting infected, and then prepare for further surges. And that means budgets and training for postgraduate health workers, for doctors, highly trained specialists, and who will practice both in the public sector and the private sector. And also implementing putting people in charge of government units, not just having a budget that goes through Parliament and says this is going to set up so many regional ICUs, but putting people in charge of those projects who will see it through from A to Z. They're not just, you know, you get the budget and you deliver the equipment, and then who takes responsibility? So, you know, this is where I say, let's work together. There's expertise in the private sector that doesn't exist in government. Maybe the government can contract some of those people in the private sector to help them to set up more units, because obviously ICU units are going to be cheaper under government. So I think that training's very important. There's other sort of low-hanging fruits. It's been mentioned also, I think, by Humphrey, that what about waiving PAYE? What about waiving PAYE on private health sector units so that they save that cost and they can pass that cost saving on to the public? What about ensuring that oxygen is available as many centers that are making oxygen as possible, that oxygen cylinders are available. What in terms of the training to, as I say, to make sure that that's ongoing as well. Medical credit is something, there's an agricultural credit fund which provides loans at cheaper rates if you're in the agricultural value chain. This doesn't exist within the health sector. I'm really surprised. The health sector have been asking for this for years. I do some agriculture, and it's easier for me to get funding for my agricultural projects than funding for health projects. That doesn't make any sense. So we should be, you know, agriculture, whether it's an agricultural credit facility or whether it's good that we have the Uganda Development Bank, and they have made funds available. But some of this is still not at the right scale. We need something in the health sector that is more microcredit, that someone can buy the machine or do the training or do the certification and that kind of thing. So there are ways, but I have to come back to it again. If we don't get vaccinated, we're going to be just going through this again and again, and Uganda is going to suffer. Thank you.
It's very true. We're not safe until everyone else is safe. I think that's exactly what it is. And like Dr. Ian Clark, and like we've continuously said, vaccination does not protect you from getting COVID-19, but protect you from the adverse effects of COVID-19. I'll wrap up the panel discussion with Psfu here. Of course, Mr. Ramadan Gobi clearly said tourism is one of the sectors that ought to be invested in as much because it directly impacts the lives when it comes to issues of job creation. But how have you as tourism players been dealing with addressing these challenges and effects of the pandemic, but also what more does government need to do to ensure that this sector keeps afloat? You earlier on talked about dealing with the taxation side, but what more can it do?
Okay, so I'll start with what have we done to keep us afloat amidst COVID. One, we've had vaccination campaigns for the tourism industry. We want all our tour guides vaccinated. We want all the people working in the different hotels vaccinated. We want to make sure that we are safe first and then we're in business. That's very important to us. Secondly, we have managed to keep tourism going on, foreign nationals, and to keep them safe while protecting our own people as well. So SOPs are being followed in most of these hotels. You must come in with your mask. You must be served with somebody wearing a mask. We're very serious about it, and we routinely test our people. What has government done? A lot of people say, what has government done? But what have you done, Mildred, about selling this country? What have I done? What has Francis done, or Stephen? For me, every Ugandan must be patriotic enough to make a deliberate choice to look beyond the political, the cultural, the tribal, and the social backgrounds, and sell this country fast. And when you get onto our social media and you look at what people say about this country, you actually think, did we borrow them? Are they actually Ugandans, or did you just borrow them from another country? We must make a deliberate effort, you and I both, to sell our country, to put its best foot forward, regardless of what you think or say, because there's an entire industry that depends on it. Now, the tourism industry, a lot of the transactions are online, which is why the data tax has really bothered us. Why would you charge us when we are going out there to bring some money in? But when you go onto Twitter, when you go onto Facebook or Instagram, please be positive about what you say about your country. If you have a problem with a politician, separate that politician from the image of Uganda before you post. And that's very important. Uganda will be here even after all these politicians. So let's protect it for our children. What can government do? So after you've played your part, then government can come in and promote MICE. Get more numbers in. MICE is meetings, incentives, conferences, and events. If we have more numbers in, we have more people spending, we have a bigger trickle-down effect on the money coming in through the tourism industry. We need to get product development looked at a larger scale and not just the national parks. Jinja is the adventure capital of Uganda. What's there to do in Jinja? We used to whitewater raft, bungee jump. You can't bungee jump anymore, but you can whitewater raft. Can we add more to this scope of activities so that we're able to sell adventure tourism, sell culture tourism, sell birding, yeah? Sell butterflies. Now, you've had a lot of noise being made about the Right Honorable Nabanja's money. Imagine if that noise and talk and discussion was diverted to the tree climbing lions in Ishasha. How many more people would want to come and see them?
Yeah.
So we have to be, the government needs to be strategic as to what it brings to the table in terms of marketing and selling Uganda. Now, marketing must be aggressive. We've had 18 months of lockdown. Now, aggressiveness, I mean, is that every time somebody in the UK, in the US, in Australia, in India, in Argentina, switches on their TV, they should want to come and see Uganda for its value. And how do we do it? Government needs to come in and aggressively market this country. We can only do so little as private sector. We definitely need a boost from government. So it's important that CNN, BBC are all showing Uganda's potential for what it's worth. Government needs to come in and review the taxation policy. I think that one is just crippling, and we need to find solutions to it sooner than later. You need to look at Uganda Airlines. And we had, taken off so well. There was so much, responsiveness about the airline. What happened? Because our airline is one of the easiest avenues into this country. So can we work on the airline PR and also work on the routes that will bring in the most in terms of returns?
Okay.
Lastly, Mildred, we want to see government more proactive. We actually want to teach them how best we can get more out of the tourism industry. You find that we think tourism is about people just coming. No, there's an art and craft industry that we need to capitalize on. Government needs to use its machinery, and we're willing to take them to these parks to enjoy these facilities so that they can be able to learn, and every time they get onto a plane, are able to sell Uganda alongside our diplomatic missions. There's so many avenues, just underutilized. Last but not least, Mildred, you and I need to get out when they open up for us and see how beautiful this country is.
Sure.
There's no doubt that we have so much to offer, and we're going to have it for a long time. So tourism gains are long-term gains. They'll be here even for your children and your grandchildren if we use them well and we look after them. So whereas we're looking at marketing, and government needs to continue to conserve for generations, so that when the things that I saw as a 5-year-old, your child gets to see as a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old. So it's important that each of us pulls our weight. There's so much potential in the tourism industry, it's undoubted, but how do we exploit this potential as a country?
All right, thank you. Thank you very much, Sivi. And I do promise I will not only actually be going out to visit Uganda, but I am planning to invest in the tourism sector in the near future. And of course, I will come take some lessons from you. But thank you very much, Sivi Tumsime, having been speaking on behalf of the tourism sector as the chair, tourism and hospitality sector, and also sits on the board of the Private Sector Foundation of Uganda. We did have Mr. Humphrey Nzei, who is the chair, manufacturing sector. We also did speak to Dr. Ian Clark, from the Uganda Health Federation, who joined us live from Fort Portal. And we also do thank Mr. Ramadan Gobi, an economist and policy analyst from Makerere University Business School as well, for engaging in the discussion. It definitely can continue. The hashtag is PSFU COVID-19 Dialogue. We're almost coming close to the end of our dialogue, and I feel like we should continue on and on. But before we get to speak to our chairman of the Private Sector Foundation of Uganda, Honorable Eli Karuhanga, allow me to speak to and engage Ricky Rapper-Thompson, who is a co-founder and director of Safe Border. Now, at the 42-day lockdown onset, that this is the second phase of the lockdown, the president did say that Border borders are not allowed to carry passengers because that's their business anyway at the end of the day, but they could be able to carry luggage. But is this even coming through? And with technological, transport carriers like Safe Border, what is the situation on ground? Ricky, thank you so much for joining us. And if you can be able to hear me, let's talk about the implications, one of the budget, but also COVID-19, the lockdown itself, in about 5 minutes or less than that, if you can. Ricky, over to you.
Thank the leadership of PSFU and its partners for giving us this opportunity. I think last year I participated in this discussion. I'm also proud to say that is a great opportunity to represent the industry that contributes and creates a lot of employment for young people in this country. But to a certain extent, to a greater extent, they are less privileged and sometimes they're not they don't get all the opportunity that they need to express what they go through. So yes, Mildred, also just to be clear, and for record purposes, for us who are people or members of the border industry, including our riders and the innovators, I think it's clear that we have been in lockdown since March 20. Only that the dynamics has changed a little bit here and there. Just to remind you that the first lockdown, when it was imposed, carrying passengers became unacceptable on 2 p.m. Later on, we were allowed to work up to 6 p.m. While Safe Border, this is exactly what we do. So that affected many people. To our surprise as well, I think it's not been clear of how government was planning to support the people in the border industry. Of course, a lot of our leaders and key people in the decision-making position kept mentioning that borders can be engaged in line with delivery services, which is great. But Mildred, just for record purposes, the delivery packages is still a very gray area. It accounts for less than 20% of the entire business in the border sector. And just to be clear that a lot of our drivers up to date has not yet been able to recover from the effect of COVID-19. The truth is rent are still outstanding, loans are still outstanding. Remember, all these bikes, they get them on loans, and they are also breadwinners in their families. You're talking about a group of around 2 million young people. Now, going straight and looking at as well into the bends to raise more fun, especially by look at taxation as a great way for private sector to relate and continue. Even for the last couple of months, for the very many months, I think since the election, a social media platform like Facebook has still been blocked, which to a lot of e-trade members and members or people who operate a lot on social media, this has affected a lot of their businesses because that businesses and individuals or businesses meet their customers. So I really would want to think that that is also paid attention to. And I think, and this is also to remind the entire country that, and people came out to really say a number of things that would help or a number of suggestions, but that was never listened to. And we have just seen a diversion that government is bringing a complete different tax to replace OTT with lower expectation as well. We really think that this kind of situation needs to be harmonized. Right now, in the situation that we are in, I'm speaking from home. My children are at home. Every other person or every other business leader is probably in their home areas. As a business, we are operating at 10 capacity at our offices. So internet is needed right now as never before. And I really think that it would have been a very good opportunity for government to pay attention to the need of the population to make internet much more affordable. Today, as I speak, internet connection and internet access and internet coverage is very discriminative in this country called Uganda, to the extent that even the people that live in Kampala do not have the same quality of speed. And I want to be very precise here that NBS is located in a very prime area, and I'm very sure that if you just cross the road and go a little bit down, you may end up having very bad connection. And also, internet is being looked at as a tool, even in areas, because when you look at this country and where it's headed to, things like agriculture becomes one of the biggest tools that we need to drive this economy forward. But then the internet connection for the people who are involved in agriculture and internet access is actually not that very easy. When I travel, and I've mentioned this last time again, I did mention this that when I travel out country, especially to Dokoro, where I come from, it's almost impossible or close to impossible to participate in a discussion like this because of the slow internet connectivity. So I really think that it's high time that our leaders start to prioritize things that will help take this country to the next level. Now, coming back to the border industry and looking at the budget, I really think that we are one of the sectors that are very important for this country, especially even when you talk about selling this country to the outside world. I was following up on the panel discussion, and the representative from tourism did mention that, you know what, people need to be very positive about this country and continue to say good things. And I really, the unfortunate reality is that when people are also angry and you don't pay attention to their need and to their struggle, they'll find other opportunities to say what does not make them happy. And I think social media has provided that opportunity, which I really think that we can use it in a very positive way to sell our country because it also has a direct effect. Now, the border industry, and I really think that there is need for government to pay very close attention and work with organized groups to really see how best the industry can be organized. Because the disorganization in the border industry is not because the industry does not want to be organized. It's because of the politics that continues to flatter, that continue to flow in the border industry. It's also as a result of the under prioritization of the industry. It's also as a result of the lack of clear policy guidelines by government. And I want to explain this that the last time when we had the lockdown, it was very unfortunate that government was trying to use that opportunity to push all these young people that were in Kampala out of the CBD and put them out of employment, which is not the right way to do. I think there's need for us to continue to engage government, and we are more than happy to be more available and continue to lead. And then also, besides that, I think there's also need for us because the border industry has been there for over 10 years, over 15 years. But every time for all these years, government has, as a country, we have been importing the borders. No, there's no single factory in Uganda that makes even the basic spare parts of the borders. It's good that we start to look into those things because as I speak today, border is not anywhere up in the village, a very good family or a very good home had a bicycle. That was a family that was doing well. And today I tell you that almost all the homes up country in the villages needs border and they continue to use border. So I really think that there's need for us to think about that, continue to invest in the border industry, make factories actually start to make some of the parts locally here, and also have a discussion on electric bikes in this country. Because really, we cannot say that we cannot say that the border should continue to operate the way it is. I think it is good. There's good interest for us, and there's going to be good return in investing in making sure that the cities or the borders or the bikes that continue to operate in these cities are smarter and continue to add and continue to help. Just as I conclude, I just want to say this that for us, as Safe Border, it's clear that the effect of COVID-19 has hit us very, very hard, and not only us and many other businesses. And I think some of this discussion came out clearly that government did not address some of these issues of the employers, because the reality is you hear very many leaders saying, keep your employees afloat, keep them at work, don't lay them off. But then there's no subsidies, there's no remedy for that. And it becomes really, really difficult. So I really think that government should start to look at companies that provide a lot of employment and try to support them with the necessary tool that is more available. And also just away from that as well, just just a little bit away from that, that even as we talk about some of this, it's more involved in some of the decisions that we so much love to remain, if we remain united, we'll build Uganda, which will become literally the part of innovation. Surfboard is one of those stories that started from Chevron Kampala and has been able to grow beyond East Africa to West Africa. And we think that importation of technology, it's high time that we stop it, build skills within the local communities, and then start the exportation of technology.
I feel the pain that the border industry is actually facing, but it's the same pain, like you clearly did state, to many other sectors of the economy. And we do hope that we are learning lessons and we are becoming a more resilient economy at the end of the day, because like Dr. Ian Clark said, there could be a third, there could be a fourth wave, but it's about how we learn to live with the disease, COVID-19, and how we get to protect ourselves. To wind up our discussion, allow me invite His Excellency Honorable Dr. Eli Karuhanga, who is also the chairperson of the board chair of the Private Sector Foundation of Uganda, to speak to us. Honorable Dr. Eli Karuhanga, over to you.
Thank you, Mildred. Can you hear me? Thank you. Mildred, thank you for conducting the meeting so well this morning, in spite of the road interruption of the technology this morning. But I thank NBS for fighting back hard to put us back. Well, I wish to greet you all, to welcome you, and to appreciate the time you have spent listening to all these presentations this morning, those listening to us in Uganda and viewing us and outside our country. I want to thank our Minister of Finance for the time he spent this morning to address these very important, challenging issues. I want to thank very much the people who participated in the panel discussions and presentations, and you, Dr. Muhumuza, for that very brilliant presentation. And I'm pleased that we spent a whole morning thinking about our country and what is the best way to deal with our country in time like this of COVID-19, in time like this of a second wave, in a time when we have lost very dear ones. We at the Private Sector Foundation lost our executive director, and we almost lost his wife. We lost his brother. We lost his father-in-law. We lost the chairman of Kasita. We lost Hajat, a beautiful, hardworking private sector lady. We've been victims. Many families are crying. They've lost dear ones. It's a very serious time for us to sit down and recalibrate and think about what to do for our country. I want to congratulate His Excellency the President for winning the elections and starting a new term. We now have very good hanging fruits. We have a president who is going to be in charge of government for another 5 years. We have a brand new parliament, almost new players, young people in parliament, very well educated, most of them, and mixed with, the gender mix is fantastic. We've seen new cabinet ministers, majority of them quite new on stage. Many are women, and also many women in parliament. So we have a parliament that is dynamic, that wants to see some fundamental changes. We have a civil service. Some of them work, when you pass at ministries, you find lights on, they are working at night. Some are not working as hard. We need a score and very useful who have sponsored this conference and who are working with private sector foundation, like MasterCard, like of the private sector. We have a government which is saying it's public sector led and private sector driven economy. This is a good understanding of how we can work and think together. We have a positive judiciary and a seemingly very active administration, cabinet and others. So what can all these institutions do with private sector to ensure that our country becomes a winning nation in the race of development with other nations and with the current challenges we have on COVID-19? That's why we spent money this morning to pay to be here, to think together with all the viewers and listeners and listen to very good presenters. The country has more new hanging fruits. We have passed very good laws on mining. We are waiting for the presidential assent. We have Karamoja being now thrown over. Very, very interesting program because Karamoja had not been addressed. Now we have planes flying over Karamoja on top of people's heads, taking photographs of what is under Karamoja. And we know Karamoja is so endowed with many minerals. We have gold, which has overtaken coffee and is our #1 export product. We know now minerals make a big difference and can actually stop our Minister of Finance from going to Washington to look for money because Uganda is endowed. And all we need are good policies. This issue of gold, for example, we could do a lot more to make, but right now, how much silver is being declared by the people who say they are refining gold? Who is regulating the gold industry? So these are small laws. I know I have been saying it in one of them. One of them is estimated to have more than 11 million ounces. That's enough to pay our entire debt in a year. If we sat down and thought about what to do, then we would know where to spend the money for the budget. I am glad that now with this new parliament, new president and cabinet, and 5 years, the budget which was passed by the last parliament has to be redone now because to manage the new wave, we have an opportunity. We have had a low-hanging fruit. Never before in our life have we had a deal where we are going to have something between $15 and $20 billion out of oil and gas. This is great news for the next 3 to 5 years. In about 25 months, we shall be seeing our first oil. This is not happening. In the whole world today, East Africa is hot. Uganda is hot, and is hot good for Kenya, good for Tanzania. And in the last 2-3 weeks, we have seen behind the scenes with oil companies, more than $4 billion of contracts. A good percentage of $4 billion was going to stay behind Uganda. Why should we be crying? We had 40% of that money, 40 billion. We had 40% of that staying in Uganda. Why should we cry? Over 100,000 people are going to be involved in the employment in this area. Roads, what have you, infrastructure, electricity, caused by oil and gas. Not every country has oil and gas. We have it. Not every country has agriculture. We have. Sivi has been telling you about, my daughter Sivi has been telling you about, we have resources that God gave us. So friends have been talking about manufacturing. The government, the budget was about manufacturing, the one we did. Now we have to change it. The infrastructure is in place. All these speakers who talked about it were fantastic. Thank you. So what do we need to do? We need to restructure the policies of and institutions across the entire government, and not just restructuring the agencies that we have been hearing. This is what Muhumuza said. I liked that very much, Muhumuza, when you said it. We have to think about restructuring the policies and institutions across the entire government. And we must look at how the country is organized. Is the current banking system capable of taking this country to another level? Supposing the agriculture, all our farmers had a bank, and like Netherlands has Rabobank. Netherlands is a small country. Most of it is under the sea. The soil is alkaline, not fertile. They are the biggest agricultural exporters in the world. They are the biggest exporters of milk in the world. They are a sixth of Uganda. They have almost 90 billion from agriculture. Our budget, just that. So what can stop us? If other people can do this, why can't we do it for us who have what soils which don't even need fertilizer? So we need to restructure, for example, the banking system. Supposing all our farmers were banking their money in a farmer's bank, like Rabobank in Netherlands, why can't we rethink this? How can we have a country without a bank of their own? So that all these dividends we pay, you know, I am been involved in banking. Why all these dividends? I guess we need to rethink our structure, our policies. And we just always talk about UDB, Uganda Development Bank. No, supposing we just had a farmer's bank, cooperative. The second thing we need to think is a low-hanging fruit. Asking all these leaders have been talking about, the new parliament. Supposing parliament really, really seriously thought that private sector is a very important organ to work with. Taxes of about 57% to keep you oiled, paid salaries and allowances. Supposing you worked with us. Supposing the ministers thought that private sector, supposing His Excellency the President thought, like in Kenya and in Rwanda, that cabinet needs to have private sector to give them information. The other day we were invited in cabinet. I went with a gentleman, Mr. Begumisa, and we addressed cabinet about fish more. And we left papers there, and I have since that time heard the president talking about fish more, that it can give us more money than Saudi Arabia. We brought this to the attention in cabinet, to the president. Supposing, yes, suppose this other low-hanging fruit is to reduce the size of public sector. Why are we spending so much money on huge household incomes? Supposing private sector was invited to participate in this parish models and accountability and corruption, do you really think that private sector is irrelevant in addressing this issue? This is a low-hanging fruit. We can deal with, we can be very big contributors. I really enjoyed sitting in a country which is gifted more than any other country in the world, and here we are, we can't even buy beds in a hospital, and we have that is going through. Please come, I want to talk to you. It's as if we are begging you. We get a little attention. We deserve better. We need cooperation. There is no way the government can run and bring change in a country without the serious involvement of private sector. I'm going to wind up. I'm going to wind up with local content. The banks are now prepared to give Ugandans loans if those companies or Ugandan companies have got contracts from oil companies. Ugandan companies cannot get those contracts from oil companies unless they are organized. They cannot be organized unless the government believes in supporting local content policies. If they do not, they will not get contracts. So I'm asking the government, such small little hanging fruits, why don't you support us? We shall speak. We try to make agreements with government ministries so that we have memorandum of understanding, so that we can cooperate. But no, you prefer to work with private sector of other countries, but try and work with private sector of your own country. You discuss meetings with businessmen from abroad. What about us? Deal with us. We will help the country. It is our country. We don't have another. I want to thank all of you for listening to this morning's and this afternoon's conversation. I want to thank my colleagues in Private Sector Foundation for all the work you put in to think, to cajole, to beg. But all these hanging fruits sitting down here, and then the whole day everybody's lamenting. Lamenting for what? We have everything going for us. God gave them to us. So we spent a whole day thinking together. Thank you, Mildred. Thank you, NBS. Thank you, listeners. Thank you, the Minister of Finance, for always being there for us. Very much appreciated. Thank you. It is too many hanging fruits, too low. Just pick them up, and the country will move forward. There's no need for the border man to be crying. Why should we close Facebook? Open it. Thank you.
Welcome, Honorable Dr. Elika Rohanga. Thank you very much. And I think I totally agree with you with the aspect of Facebook and with the aspect of collaboration between government and the private sector. There is more engagement that needs to be taken into consideration because if we're talking about a private sector-led economy, what better way than practicing having to also work together? Thank you so much for being a part of the conversation. But as we get to wind up, I'll give a minute each to the people I've had a seat with the entire time, all through this time. And I'll start off with you, Mr. Stephen Asimwe, is the Director of Policy and Business Development at the Private Sector Foundation Uganda. What is the take-home from this discussion for you?
First of all, I want to appreciate NBS for giving us a fantastic platform. I've been getting messages from all over the world. And apologies for the hitch that we got.
Sure.
But nevertheless, we came back. I want to first also appreciate our sponsors, Innovation Village, the Uganda Tourism Association, the Uganda Healthcare Federation, and all of our sponsors and partners who have made this possible.
Okay.
This is the end and the beginning. We had 6 months of consultation with our different players and partners across the country. We did present our feelings and views to the government. The government has presented a budget, which we are now discussing and unpacking. And like you said in the beginning, how do we ensure that we take this forward? This squarely lies in our mandate as a private sector foundation. Our mandate is in 4 pillars.
Okay.
The first mandate is research, which basically looks at analysis. We look at, we investigate, we scrutinize. And basically we are trying to do this of the budget for Ugandans, by Ugandans. The second mandate we have is advocacy, which is really a lot of the things we are going to ask and engage government. And advocacy basically means engaging. It means having a discussion. And so today for me was a great, great day on the advocacy platform. We have engaged, we have discussed, we have debated, we have scrutinized, we have analyzed the budget, really, so that we get something very good for us. The third mandate that we have as a PSFU is obviously the issue of capacity building and skilling. You must admit with me that from the time we started, it was a learning process. Even from all the information that we have, you get to understand what happens in other people's spheres of engagement. And I think that the take from here has been a lot of learning, relearning, and maybe adjusting on how we go forward. And the fourth and very good element of our mandate is partnership and collaboration. We partner with everybody. We partner with government, we partner with international institutions, development partners, academia. You saw what Professor Muhumuza did, Professor Gobi, Ian Clark, CV, Mr. Humphrey Nzei. It's a really, it's an ecosystem. Sure. We cannot operate alone. We need the media. So it's everybody for everybody, enabling everybody. So PSFU, in as far as I'm concerned, has scored very much today. And the biggest, if there was one word which came out of this discussion, is that it's policy.
True.
Policy, policy, policy.
Thank you.
If we just reshape the policy, engagement, and environment, everything else falls in place. Well, it's not just a case of a budget, but the how, the where's, all the 5 W's that will come about it. And then obviously, I just want us, on a closing note, there was something we didn't discuss, but in 3 seconds I'll say it. We have a 1.2 billion population market, Africa. That's the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. It was established on the 1st of July. Uganda was a signatory. We were part of the framers of that huge market and constituency, so to speak. Government, working with the private sector, can change the dimension of this economy. Young population, very populated, very skilled. We just need to just adjust a bit of the way we engage each other. Okay. So starting from here, starting tomorrow, I'm carrying a bag full of discussions.
Okay.
Work starts today and ended yesterday. So thank you guys for listening to us. And obviously, I believe that this is not just the start. There'll be repeated conversations, engagements, as far as shaping our economy.
Thank you. And like you said, it's the start of of an end and an end of a start at the end of the day. Finally, in just a few seconds, Mr. Francis Kisirinya, what is your take home?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mildred. I think over the last 1.5 years, we've been through a lot as a country. Sicknesses, problems with economics, and so many things. And what I picked today is the idea that there is hope. I could see a lot of discussions that were pointing at how we can actually overcome the challenges we are facing with the lives today, the challenges we are facing with our businesses. And when we come together, it is very possible for us to be able to overcome these challenges. And it is about each one of us bringing out their best. Each one of us thinking and believing that we all depend on each other and we all can support each other to overcome these particular problems that we're facing today. So let's continue engaging, let's continue supporting each other. Let's continue listening to each other. So I thank you very much, most especially you, the people who attended this particular session, dialogue, online, on TV, and you, NBS, for a wonderful job. We really are very pleased with how all of this has turned out. Okay. So thank you very much, and we carry forward this message of hope, and we're going to get to work immediately.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Francis Kisirinya, who is the Acting Executive Director of the Private Sector Foundation of Uganda, and also I did have Mr. Stephen Asimo, who is the Director, Policy and Business Development. These entire discussions are in a situation where we are not certain whether it's coming to an end or we just have to adapt, which is the reality, that we just have to adapt, and we're talking about COVID-19. After all is said and done, after the policies are developed and implemented, at the end of the day, you need to be alive. And that is why I want to remind you that the standard operating procedures do apply. Please make sure that you social distance, wash your hands with soap and water as many times as possible. If you have access to a sanitizer, use it. And above all, if you're stepping out, this is very important. The reason why here we weren't wearing our masks, we had followed all the other protocols and we were distanced enough, but given the fact that we're going to be stepping away from here, we're going to get our masks back on. Remember to mask up, because COVID does not spread itself, but we do spread it. Have a good afternoon, and let the conversation continue on hashtag PSFU COVID-19 Dialogue.